The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus calls his disciples to him and said to them, "You know that among the pagans their so-called rulers lord it over them, and their great men make their authority felt. This is not to happen among you. No, anyone who wants to become great among you must be your servant, and anyone who wants to be first among you must be slave to all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." My sisters and brothers, the Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
If we want to follow Christ, we have to be a servant of all, a slave of all. Let me tell you a story about a time when I was made to take that literally, of being a nobody with nothing and needing to trust in people's goodness. In the second year of the Jesuit novitiate, the Jesuit novices in Australia are dropped 200 kilometres walk from our first house in Australia, which is at Seven Hill in South Australia, about 250 kilometres north of Adelaide. Seven Hill is to this day a retreat house, a parish, and thank God it's a winery. In fact, it's a very good winery. With a backpack on our back and a sleeping bag within it, in those days 40 cents for an emergency phone call and a letter for the police because we're officially vagrants, you have to walk the entire 200 kilometres begging every single day for your food and accommodation. In the pursuit of board and lodging, we were told by the novice master that you can't tell anybody who you are. You can't trade off being a Jesuit. But we were told if you were let into somebody's house, once you'd established the extent of their hospitality, you might tell them who you are and what you're doing, just so they weren't anxious they'd invited Jack the Ripper to stay the night. But if in the first instance the homeowner offered the garage and a sandwich, and then they find out you're a Jesuit novice, oh, now they want to offer the guest room and the dining room table. We were told you can't get an upgrade from economy to business class. You have to take the first offer when you're a nobody with nothing. Those 10 days were the only time in my life that I've known anything like hunger, even in these most contrived of settings. If I knocked on your door this afternoon, you didn't know who I was or what I was about, and I wanted to stay in your house, would you let me stay? A couple of people are saying, yes, where the hell were you when I most needed you? I slept in hostels run by the Vincent de Paul in Gawler. I slept out under the stars a couple of nights. I slept in bandstands in parks. When it was teeming rain one day, I broke into a broken down old schoolhouse on the side of the road just to get out of the rain. And I also was welcomed into people's homes. On halfway through the pilgrimage, as we Jesuits call it, I arrived in the town of Riverton, tiny little town of maybe less than 1,000 people. And I was drawn on that freezing cold winter's night by the big blue fluorescent cross that hung over what I was soon to discover was the Catholic Church. There was nothing in the rules that said you couldn't beg from churches. You just can't tell them who you are and what you're doing. So I walked up the steps of the presbytery and I met one of the most wonderful priests I have ever met in my life. I gave out my spiel, and at the end I said, "Father, I'm wondering whether you can put me in touch with the local St. Vincent de Paul Society." To which this great Irishman looked at me and said, "You're looking at the local Vincent de Paul Society." "Well, Father, I'm wondering if you can help me. I'll do something for you." He said, "There's a church, a schoolroom behind the church. We don't use it anymore. And there's a bunk bed and a shower and a toilet. and I'll give you sheets and blankets, and I'll give you $5 for the cafe tonight for dinner, and $5 for breakfast in the morning, and then you've got to be on your way. Is that a deal? This was the best deal I had had in 6 days. But I left town the next day, not telling him who I was or what I was doing, because strictly he hadn't let me into his house. So I'm now 3 or 4 days later, it's a Saturday, I'm on the second last day of the pilgrimage, and I arrived in a town called Saddleworth, again a small South Australian country town. And it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went to the biggest, poshest house in town. I thought they're rich enough to be good to me. And at 5 o'clock on that Saturday afternoon, I met on her doorstep the redoubtable Mrs. Mary Byrne. She grilled me about who I was, where I was from, how I came to be in such need, where I was going. I never told a lie. But being a good Jesuit, I didn't tell the whole truth either. And after the interrogation, she plucked herself up to her full 5 foot and said, in her very broad Australian accent, "All right, I reckon I can trust you. You can come in tonight. All the kids and the grandkids are coming over for one of me baked dinners. One more's going to make no damn difference at this stage. So we'll have 17 for dinner tonight. I'm ready for that." And she said, "You stink to high heaven. You can stay in the guest room. You can have a shower. And then tomorrow morning give you breakfast and you've got to clear out. Okay?" Okay, I got inside. First time now, on day 9, I'm now inside someone's house. So I told her who I was and what I was doing. I was a Jesuit novice on pilgrimage to Seven Hill. She changed completely and said, "Get out of here." And for a moment I thought she meant I actually had to get out of there. And then she changed again and she said, "You haven't been sent out as a spy, have you?" And I said, "Why in goodness name would you think I've been sent out as a spy?" She said, "Well, I'm a Catholic, aren't I? And I go to the local Catholic church here, Sacred Heart Catholic Church here, and the Jesuits look after us from Seven Hill. I've grown up in a Jesuit parish all my life. And God knows you Jesuits are always going on about a faith that does justice and being men and women for others and caring for the poor. And I thought you lot might have been plonked all over the parish this week to spy on us to see if we've been listening to all those sermons all these weeks." Now that's a tough old parish, isn't it? They send out midweek spies to see if you're listening to the Sunday sermon. I recommended that to Father Franco. That's coming in this week for you. I assured Mary that I was not a spy, Jesuit or otherwise, and complimented her on her extraordinary generosity. And that night I had the most marvellous time with her family. But the next morning after breakfast, I'm on the last day of the pilgrimage. And I get into a tiny little hamlet, 400 people, of Watervale in the mid-afternoon, that Sunday afternoon. And I found out later that everybody was off playing or watching the local football competition, the Aussie Rules as it is in South Australia. And all I could see on the road, on the rise leading out of town, a woman was weeding her front garden beds. I could see that. She seemed to be my only option in town, so I walked up the hill into her front garden and I said, "Hello, I'm Richard Leonard. I'm going through to the Clare district to get work on one of the wineries to get my passage back to Sydney. I have nowhere to stay tonight and nothing to eat, and I'm wondering whether you can help me with either or both." To which she looked up and she said, "Are you the Jesuit who stayed with Mary Byrne last night?" I said, "I am. Yep, that's me." She said, "Oh yeah, Mary gave me a ring this morning and just said to keep a good eye for you out on the road. That's why I'm doing me front garden beds, not the back garden beds as I had been intending." And that night, the Byrne family came down and joined the Brisky family, and we had a long and liquid dinner in the Riesling Valley of Australia all over again. It was going well. When I got to Seven Hill the next day, pilgrimage now completed, I wrote back to that wonderful Irish parish priest, that fantastic pastor. And I said, "Father, you may remember that a couple of nights ago you looked after a young fella who was homeless, and I'm just wanting you to know I'm actually a Jesuit novice, and we're on spiritual pilgrimage to Seven Hill. And if, please God, one day I'm ordained a Catholic priest, I hope I will be as magnificent a pastor to someone else that you were to me when you didn't know who I was or what I was doing. When I got back to Pymble in Sydney, where the Jesuit novitiate then was, there was a letter waiting for me from the parish priest. I have never forgotten what it said. I was educated by the Jesuits for my entire education in Limerick in Ireland. I hated every single minute of it. If I'd known who you were and what you're about, if I'd known you're a Jesuit, I would have happily kicked your backside and told you to get out of town. But even now, the Jesuits have tracked me down in the middle of rural South Australia and pulled the wool over my eyes one more time. Will I ever be rid of you lot? But I think on this occasion, I can forgive myself. I can let myself off the hook. Because I knew there was something a little bit different about you. I knew it because, let's face it, you are without question the most articulate, well-spoken beggar I've ever met in my life. I learnt 3 things on that road powerfully about being a slave and being a servant, which is basically being a nobody. That's what Jesus is saying. Don't put your ego first. That's what the gospel means. We're not literally going to become servants and slaves this week. It says don't put your own ego in the center all the time if you're going to follow me. I learnt a hard way in 10 days 3 things about that. Firstly, I learnt the world is good. I learnt that you are good people. We're all sinners, but we are loved sinners. There is nothing we have ever done, nothing we're doing and nothing that we're doing in the future that God will not forgive, convert our hearts and bring us back. People are good. We've got evil, dreadful, shocking people, but most of us are good people trying to do and be better. Secondly, I learnt on that road how powerful the Lord's Prayer is. I prayed every day on that road, multiple times a day, give us this day our daily bread. And that wasn't an abstraction. We have grave obligations to one another for both the physical, spiritual, and emotional daily bread of our lives. We're not here for ourselves and our salvation. We're here for the world. We're here to go and change it for the better in Christ's name by being his servant in the world. And finally, I learned one very important thing. If you're going to be on pilgrimage anywhere, travel lightly. The more stuff you carry, the harder and harder that trip becomes. Not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. My sisters and brothers, welcome to our retreat day, whereby this afternoon I'll do 3 things for you. We will affirm that we are sinners, but we are loved sinners. We will affirm the daily bread of God's goodness, which will feed on stuff which might make us better to be servants in the world. And I hope by this afternoon I'm going to say things for some of you, hopefully all of you, that will see us all travel a little more lightly as we are Christ's servants in the world. And if later this afternoon I'm homeless and knock on your door, make sure you look after me. Amen.